Welcome to OhSister, where I unpack my Mormon sister missionary journals 10 years later. Okay, so real quick before I jump into things, it's not the focus of this week, but it comes up in my journals talking about somebody's experiences with suicidality and an attempt, as well as, kind of family issues going on. So if that's something you want to be aware of, just either skip this episode or at least, skip kind of that last day so you don't hear about that. Gotta take care of ourselves, right? But okay. Gotta do content warnings. I believe in them. Okay, so let's get started. I started this project because I wanted to track the disruption of my expected development from a probably still pretty conservative, but I considered myself to be kind of feminist, progressive Mormon woman, to how I ended up being a very strictly orthodox, almost evangelical woman raring to be a trad wife. And so while I was reading through my journal entries a couple weeks ago, from day 179, I was really caught off by this statement. Quote, "I never want to stop being a missionary." So I kind of tagged that as a thing I wanted to talk about. And I've just been thinking a lot about the systematic subjugation of women throughout Mormon history and how it's built into the fabric of the religion and kind of the society. Those really are one and the same to me. So thinking about how I was afraid to stop being a missionary, if you recall, I went on my mission partially because I was afraid of making decisions. I was afraid of moving on to the next step, which I saw, I was taught I was supposed to get married, and I was afraid of that. I didn't know what the heck I was supposed to be doing with my life, with school. So I was like, I'm going to go on a mission because I can put it off, and in fact, mission will be great because someone will tell me what to do every day and I won't have to make any decisions. And we've also seen how on my mission, my tendency towards perfectionism has been ramping up day after day. So there's this clear connection between how I have a fear of making decisions, I'm so afraid of making mistakes, and I've also got this really intense perfectionism that just keeps getting worse. It makes sense with that perspective why I wrote that I never want to stop being a missionary, because it's not that I really enjoyed. I didn't get a lot of deep and surface level joy from being a missionary. Most of it was really stressful and unpleasant, but I was so afraid of making decisions that this felt like, the better option. So I've also been diving into the stories of the women in the church who were first roped into polygamous marriages with Joseph Smith, and also his friends at the time who were prominent male leaders. I finally started listening to Lindsey Hansen Park's podcast, Year of Polygamy. I highly recommend checking this out yourself. It's so interesting. So I just got to the episodes about Emily and Eliza Partridge. And I was really curious about when these would come up because I knew that the Partridge sisters were my relatives. And listening to their stories was bringing up so much cathartic rage. And I just got swept into wanting to read more about them and more about Caroline Partridge, who was not one of Joseph Smith's plural wives, so she's not covered in this, in this part of the podcast that's focused on Joseph Smith, but she is one of their sisters. And she was my great-grandma's grandmother, Caroline Partridge. And I've been realizing that, I kind of know the histories that were told to me of my Mormon family, but I've been realizing that they definitely are skewed towards a faithful narrative. So I had this burning need to know more about her situation and like what was actually going on, and not just what was kind of the oral tradition that was passed down of like, here's our faithful ancestors and how wonderful they were. I was like, what was it actually like for her? Because I was learning what it was like for her sisters, and it was horrible. So I'm going to keep doing more digging. But so far I found a history that was written by her granddaughter, which was intriguing to me because, she would have been a Mormon, but it was a woman who wrote the history. So I was like, cool, a woman's perspective on her grandma who was part of polygamy, right? And this history definitely had, a faith-promoting bias, but it did also talk more openly about how hard things were for her. And she was the survivor of so many traumatic events. And from what I can see of things, she was unprotected from the influences of intense church leaders, and she got swept into Mormonism at a vulnerable age and period of her life. So, kind of setting the stage, I'm swept up in the excitement and anger and despair of finally reading more real history of early Mormon women, and even the women in my family that started my own connection with this church. And then I read one of the few direct quotes from my great-great-grandma, Caroline, in this history that was written of her. So, at the end of the history, there it says, on her 79th birthday, she wrote, quote, 79 years have passed almost like a dream. And I wonder sometimes how many opportunities for doing good to my associates have I neglected. In all these years that I have lived, my desires have been to do all the good that I could and as little evil as possible. I read that, and with my missionary journals being so fresh because of this project, I instantly made the connection. This is just like the stuff I was writing in my mission journals. Her complete focus on her own shortcomings of not always being 100% perfectly outwardly focusing and giving and good and Christ-like. It's just what I was being pushed into more and more by the missionary environment. I pulled up a family history website and I stared at this chain of names that connected me directly to her. And I could see in that moment how the suffocating perfectionism I was suffering from as a sister missionary had in fact been passed down from generation to generation. The perfectionism wasn't incidental to the Mormon experience. It was a parasitic method of control. My great-great-grandmother Caroline lost her father and was pulled into a loveless, supportless, polygamous marriage at 17 years old with her own sister as a sister wife. And she was held hostage to being with her family in heaven by the church's teachings, so she could never leave. She went through so much shit because of the men leading the church, and she really had no choice but to stand by these men, by the church, to stand for the church. And it looks to me like one strong method of control that was both enforced by the men taking advantage of her, but then was taken in and internalized as a way for her to psychologically control herself, was to have this intense shame cycle of fear and perfectionism. My hunch is that she looked past the ways the church and its people abused her and her family, and she learned to focus completely on her internal shame and distracted herself from how she was trapped in an abusive system by instead neurotically focusing on trying to be perfect. And this was passed down to her children, who passed it down generation after generation until it was given to me. And looking at, kind of my Mormon family system, the extended family, and my memories of like my grandma, it seems like it's part of the familial expectations that no matter what's going on internally, We have to always think of what others see. We have to make sure people see us on the outside as faithful saints, joyfully doing God's will. And this focus on how we're perceived is eerily found in the history written by Caroline's granddaughter, Mammy Wells Lovell, who followed Caroline's quote with this final paragraph. Quote, "Her life was truly a wonderful example to her posterity. All of them who knew her think of her as a perfect character, and all hope to emulate her fine virtues, at least to the extent that they hope to enjoy her society when their time comes to leave mortality." End quote. So that was just, like, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. There is this built-in family expectation that was probably instilled by this intense brainwash abuse thing that went on with my great-great-grandma, who got trapped in this horrible system, horrible marriage. And there's just suffering and abuse and trauma, and you just have to hold it all in and just try to live your life so that at the end people will say, she had a perfect character, she was a wonderful example to her posterity, and we all hope to emulate her fine virtues, with a threat that if you want to be with your family, if you want to enjoy her society, when your time comes to leave mortality, you better show up now. Which feels really intense. So the final thing I'll share at this beginning section was I was reading through some of my early journals to see, clearly my mission was intense and things got much worse, but, I seem to have been a certain way, and I wanted to see how did I already have some of these tendencies before I went on a mission. And I found this crazy story that I wrote in August of 2013. So I had just graduated high school and I was getting ready to go to BYU. So I'll read this. It's Saturday, August 24th, 2013. I just went to pick tomatoes at Grandma and Grandpa's garden. But anyway, what I really wanted to remember was this story Grandma told. Quote, "When your family had just moved here, you were in kindergarten. The bus stop was just outside by the swing, and you were so terrified of dogs that you wouldn't or couldn't wait by yourself. Someone always had to go with you. At one point, your dad made a provocative remark about what would you do if a dog ran into the church during sacrament meeting? And you said, well, it would just have to go away because I wouldn't leave." She finished with, "That's the kind of material you are, Allie." And yeah, that's an eerie little moment where I'm like, I'm just like my great Grandma Caroline, aren't I? I've been having a great time working on this project, and it turns out it takes a lot of time every week to keep this up. If you have the desire and the means to support me financially, it really helps a lot. Of course, I have the disclaimer that your donations will not bring eternal salvation for you or anyone else. There are links in the description where you can make a one-time donation or sign up to be a monthly patron to support this and my other creative work. Thank you. Let's get back to it. Monday, April 20th, 2015, Mission Day 192. We've had a nice, slow preparation day. I even had time to finish my personal replies to the seminary letter And I wrote 2 postcards. A cute story from the day. We went to a local t-shirt shop. Sister Feist is pretty tight with Irene, the store's owner. She even invited herself to Sister Feist's wedding. Anyway, she's a fiery, cute lady from the South with a brassy laugh who loves missionaries and gives us discounts on teas. So today I picked out 2 $5 shirts. One for Ben, one for Kate, and a regular one for me. Sky blue. Smiley face. I mentioned that I was getting one for Ben's birthday. She took one look at me, said, "It's a present for your brother?" Then stuffed them in a bag and refused to let me pay. The more I protested, the firmer she got. She wouldn't even let me pay for my shirt. Gah! I hope I can do something for her someday. That's nice little story. I don't think I have to unpack anything about that. Let's just keep going. Wednesday, April 22nd, 2015, Mission Day 194. I seem to have slipped into a habit of writing every other day. I guess I'll start fixing it. Smiley face. A memory from yesterday was having Erica, a recent convert from Colorado, come with us to our appointments all day. I'm super amazed by her independence and responsibility. She moved out of her house by necessity at age 15 and is now standing on a strong financial foundation. She was baptized in December and will be entering the mission field this December. She was there with me as we sat in Nora's home, waiting for Sister Crompton and Sister Springer to come for an hour. We, in joint effort, finished half the pizza in a slow and steady process. Nora was almost annoyed, but Sister Feist charmed her up, and they'll be fine. I drank a can of soda and died the rest of the day. Today I got lots of good memories. We had a huge breakfast Erica made us, including donuts from the Spearfish Bakery, a huge carby lunch from Sister Calhoun, and dinner with Grandma Rooks right before ward coordination. We are so stuffed. It feels like Christmas. While at Sister Calhoun's, after lunch, I asked if I could use her sewing machine to fix up my slip. The project ended up taking her an hour to do. So while she sewed all the lace back on and the ripping seams back together, I asked her questions and she told me about past sewing projects, about her family, and about her little daughter Lily, who died as a little girl. Sister Calhoun is working on a quilt made from her little Easter dresses, and at one point she needed a scrap backing to reinforce a strap on my slip, so she put a little blue flowered square in. Now I have to keep it forever. Sister Feist threw a boiled egg at Sister Crompton, and they ended up in a food fight, and I got super sad and started crying. I'm not even sure why. Good thing we all love each other, and it wasn't super weird afterwards. Oh, wow. I guess I'll go backwards. So, clearly, a lot's been going on. Just a couple days ago, we'd had this stressful incident with, a stalker guy, and it didn't really feel like it was wrapped up in a satisfying way. There's just lots of stress. We're trying so hard to do a lot. I'm getting kind of trauma dumped on by this woman telling me about her daughter who died tragically young, it's intense, right? And then also I was just kind of having a hard time feeling like I could be honest with my companions about how I was feeling, especially if I was upset with them. So yeah, of course, now I can look back and see, okay, I'm clearly not comfortable with food fights, and of course I started crying, and I couldn't admit to myself how stressed and upset and unhappy I was, and it feels really like I'm trying to put the faithful spin on it and say, good thing we all love each other and it wasn't super weird afterwards. But I was like, I don't know, did we all love each other, or did we all have to sort of feel that way in order to get through all of the emotional tension and power dynamics struggles that were going on? That's kind of more what, yeah. That's kind of what I think is going on. But, okay, going backwards. Yeah, very sad. It was very kind of Sister Calhoun to help me with mending my clothes. And I actually do still have this slip, and she actually also ended up giving me one that her daughter had, because it was like the same size anyway. I have them both, and it is just this strange little thing now that I'm like totally ex-Mormon, but like I still carry with me the memories of this woman's daughter, like that's the interesting thing about old clothes. I could go on my soapbox about how I really like old clothes, partially because it's like a kind of a cool way to remember the history of people, but just like a weird little moment, right? Weird little moment. But we gotta talk about Erica, the recent convert, and also Nora. Okay, so this I believe this is the first time I've talked about Erica. So yeah, she was 15-year-old or whatever. I guess she wasn't 15 now, but she was like a young adult or a teenager, kind of just our same age, and she was clearly in some bad, toxic, dysfunctional situation, and of course was receptive to missionaries, because those are the people who are most receptive to church stuff. And we were prepping her to go on a mission. I think it was a rule that if you were baptized, you had to wait a year to go on a mission. Fortunately, she did not end up going. But yeah, she at this point was still pretty in the close, almost falsely close relationships of being a recent convert and being tight friends with the missionaries. And so somehow it ended up that Sister Crompton and Sister Springer went somewhere, and I was doing a split with her, and I don't remember what they were doing, but I was with Erica, and we were at Nora's house. And now you probably don't remember who Nora is. She is the woman who is not as super active, but she was Mormon, and she was the really intense grandma who had connections with the biker gang, and I was like kind of thought she was cool, but also kind of scared of her. And it was like, yeah, we probably don't want to mess with this lady because she seems a little bit like possibly she would do unstable, scary things because she threatens them with her own children. Anyway, I don't exactly remember what was going on, but I can remember how scared it was anytime I was at her house and she was like gonna be upset. And it was interesting to me that I wrote in here that we were just sitting there for an hour slowly eating the pizza that she had fed us. Like, Erica and I, we could just tell that we shouldn't upset this lady, and we were like, oh yeah, we'll just eat slow and be like, oh sure, they'll be here in a minute, don't worry. And then I wrote, Nora was almost annoyed, but Sister Feist charmed her, and they'll be fine. Like, good thing Sister Feist was so kind of charming and could kind of sweet talk people. It's a good skill to have as a missionary. And fortunately, there was no sort of blow up anything, but I remember it was very scary. And of course, I'll have all these sort of restrictive food shaming things going on. I'm like mentioning that I drank soda and I felt bad about it, and we had a big breakfast and a huge carby lunch, and also there's just a weird thing about we were fed so many meals that day that it was like it was Christmas and we couldn't say no to people. Ugh. Gross. Okay, so now I will just continue on. Okay. Thursday, April 23rd, 2015. Mission day 195. We had 5 lessons scheduled today, and none of them came to pass. Frowny face. Sister Feist was having super bad, sharp pain, so we went to Walmart in Pine Ridge for medicine. I also called the police department, and an officer advised us about what to do about Stalker Man. Sister Feist just refined my eyebrows for me. I hadn't expected such a rounded, wide-set look, but it actually looks really good. We'll see what they look like by next month, I guess. Smiley face. We did get in a nice visit with Sister Lyman, a widowed sister who was just moved from her Wyoming ranch to Custer by her children. She didn't really want to move. She doesn't feel at home, but we sang some hymns for her, and she shared a powerful testimony of our Savior. I really liked that she thinks every home should have a piano. Oh, wow. Well, that was such a whiplash. Total whiplash. Okay. So, elephant in the room. This was really weird to read because I honestly forgot that we did any sort of contacting the authorities and doing anything to deal with the stalking thing. In recording and talking about the original incident, I was like, all I could remember was being freaked out and scared, and I just didn't even remember that, actually, the next week, I ended up calling the police, and trying to deal with it. So, I'm glad I did that. It doesn't seem like I was told to do so by my leaders. It seems like, it happened on Saturday, and this is Thursday, so it's almost been a week. And I think I must have just been like, oh wait, I should call the police. Like, I should have called the police day of, but I guess I could call them now, right? So I'm glad that I did that, and it's weird that I forgot. I guess I just tried to not remember the details, right? Which is sad and makes sense. And I guess the other thing I wanted to talk about was just when I met with Sister Lyman, and I don't know the whole story, but it's interesting. The way that I framed it was that she was kind of forced to move by her children. Maybe she was in a, bad situation and needed more care, but just in theme with how this week I'm focusing on how Mormonism is really good at disempowering women and removing their choices, and saying just focus on having a powerful testimony and feeling bad about yourself and trying to be better, and maybe if you're lucky you can have a piano. One small pleasure in life. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. That just really fits the weekly theme. Okay. Friday, April 24th, 2015. Mission day 196. Famous last words. Quote, "It can't get any crazier than this." So we just got a phone call from President Allen where he let us know that Sister Applewhite will be going home for emergency eye care. So Sister Crompton will be headed to Marsland, Nebraska for her last 10 days. And Sister Feist will be here with me. So our trio is ending. And I drew a little straight line mouth face. Like, it's not a frowny face, but face. We had a lovely branch FHE today in Spearfish. Sister Calhoun had the kids act out Joseph Smith's first vision, and they each got to find and unwrap the gold-papered scriptures Sister Crompton worked so hard on. We were given the opportunity to sing Joseph Smith's first vision together, and it was an awesome way to invite the spirit. The kids quieted down, and the adults teared up. District meeting today was also great, especially since we concluded with Sister Feist's handmade Nutella cracker cookies. Smiley face. We also went to the post office, the police office, and the courthouse. Now, Ben, my brother, will get chiclets and a spearfish tea for his birthday, and we actually ended up just giving the police the temporary restriction paperwork. I don't want to file a case and get a restraining order. Definitely unnecessary. In district meeting, we talked some about why our favorite transfers are our favorite transfers, and it's definitely a lot to do with our companions. Tying in thoughts from studying charity, it's definitely all about focusing on making sure your companion has an amazing transfer. That's really how to do it. Smiley face. Okay, so another interesting day. I guess I'll start with the phone call for Sister Crompton being kind of emergency transferred again. So, yeah, I actually forgot that this happened. I was reading this, so I was like, oh yeah, that did happen. So, the end of this transfer was just me and Sister Feist. And Sister Crompton did go to Marsland. It was, only like 10 more days for the transfer. And yeah, it was just funny because it was like every day this week or like every other day I kept writing, it just can't get any crazier, and it just kept getting crazier. So that's a testament to how sort of out of your own control your life is when you're a missionary, right? Just like, of course, normally in life, just kind of random things will happen sometimes, but also we were so affected by if something randomly happened to another missionary, then all of a sudden, like, we all got shuffled around. So, you just never knew where you were going to be the next day, really. I wanted to mention the first vision song. So it's one of the famous, obviously, LDS Mormon hymns. You don't really grow up singing this if you're just general Christian, I would imagine, because it's all about the story of Joseph Smith's first vision. And I just had to point out that we as missionaries were, for some reason, like, teaching this lesson for kids and adults, and Sister Crompton made really cool props for the kids to find, little papers made out of gold, that little scriptures, and we sang the first vision, and it turns out that both of these things are not really accurate to the actual church history. Like the way that now it's sort of coming out. Like, historians have known for a long time, but it's just now that the church is kind of allowing the official narrative of the story to adjust, so that I grew up, and generations before me grew up learning that Joseph Smith had the gold plates where the Book of Mormon was on. And he would look at them under a blanket to cover them, to keep them hidden, and read out loud, translate, and then his friend would translate, write it down. Would be the scribe. And then we've learned that actually, usually the supposed gold plates, which, of course the church teaches that they exist, right? But now I'm like, that's debatable, but the official, actually what was happening when the writing of the Book of Mormon was taking process was that Joseph Smith was looking into a hat, and he was looking at a sort of mystical rock where he was like reading or getting the story or whatever. And then his friend. So like the gold plates were not in the room. Not in the room. And the story of the first vision, it turns out there are multiple versions, and the one that we end up singing about and quoting, especially as missionaries, memorizing and quoting, that is not actually the probably most, that's like a later edition that was adjusted. So anyway, there's just all these things, and they result in, I wrote that it was an awesome way to invite the spirit, and the kids quieted down and the adults teared up. And I just remember this kind of thing feeling very, it felt like proof that what we were doing was real and true and good. But in reality, it was kind of showing how we were training in to ourselves to feel this good, comforted feeling. Because for the kids, they were for the first time experiencing, you know, like, oh, we're all in this kind of hushed, reverent room, we're singing music. The adults that you believe and trust are telling you what they're telling you, history. So, of course, you're listening and taking it in. And then when you're an adult and you're in the setting and you see kids learning and it's like what you really believe, it's going to bring up all this sort of nostalgia and beautiful memories of being a child and learning this and being, you know, kind of the innocence of being a child and having your first belief. And, right, like, that setting, it totally makes sense that whether or not the thing that was being taught was actual history or actually true would feel really comforting and nurturing in that environment, right? So I thought that was worth pointing out. I also wanted to point out that so I can't remember about going to the police office, to the police. I can't remember if it was something that I specifically pushed for, or if Sister Crompton and Sister Feist had pushed for it. I don't think that it was our mission leaders telling us to go, but since I didn't write it down and I can't remember, I can't say for sure. But in any case, we did proceed to go, and, you know, we called the police, and then they gave us advice, and then they said, I guess they said, like, so you can get a temporary restriction paperwork, or if you want to be really official, you can file a case and get a restraining order. And it stands out to me that I wrote in my journal, like, of course, we didn't want to make a fuss, you know. I was so worried about making a fuss and, like, feeling like a problem. So even though we felt worried and nervous about it, because we didn't want to make a fuss and cause a problem and, like, make it be a whole thing where, like, we'll just do the temporary restriction paperwork. I didn't want to file a case. I didn't want it to be official and get a restraining order, because that would, I mean, on one hand, there's, like, some practicality to it of, like, maybe we weren't even gonna be there for more than a week, right? There was only like 10 days left, so who knows where we're gonna be. But definitely there's that Mormon young woman. I don't want to be a problem. I'm not going to trust my intuition of feeling unsafe beyond doing sort of the bare minimum. And even that, I was surprised I did it. And then the last point I talked about was, like, discussing your relationship with your companion and how that affects what is your favorite transfer. And I just had this weird, like, super, it's like not even passive aggressive. It's so passive, it's not aggressive. It's just like, I'm so not saying what I'm thinking here. I'm just like, oh yeah, in order to have a good transfer, and to have a good relationship with our companion, just like you just got to focus on making sure your companion has a good transfer. Just focus on them, focus on making them happy. And I just didn't even write down, I was like, and I definitely wouldn't have said it in the group meeting, but I certainly also didn't write down that I felt pressure to make every transfer feel like it was my favorite, but at that point, this transfer did not feel like my favorite, and I was having a hard time feeling like totally comfortable and relaxed with my current companions. But I could not admit to that at this point. And so I was like, I'll just sort of brainwash myself and guilt myself that if I'm not having a good transfer, it's my fault, because I'm supposed to be having a good time with my companions and I'm supposed to be making sure they're having a good time. So it's my fault if it's not going well. And to an extent that is true, right? Like, if you are with a companion or a partner or something and like things are not going well and you're not talking to them about it, like the only way to fix that is by you like being honest with them and talking to them. But that's not the strategy I had in mind. The strategy was to just continue to compress all aspects of myself that didn't seem like they were naturally fitting in this forced relationship, and to never speak up about things I was annoyed with and just like people please my way through it, right? So that was pretty doomed to failure, and kind of obviously was a bit of a failure, right? Okay. Saturday, April 25th, 2015, Mission Day 197. Today was Family Service Day for our ward. We went to the fish hatchery from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. and helped with landscaping, except we were actually there from about 11 to 1. We were late because of studies. We left early so Sister Feist could get Sydney ready for prom. Smiley face. I had my first ever real teaching exchange today. Sister Feist and Sister Crompton had second dinner with the Ikedas, while I went with the Meagers to read out of the Book of Mormon with Doug. I'm glad we were just reading scriptures since we got pretty tangential. Smiley face. They explained tithing, fasting, missionary fund organization, service in the church, excommunication, the Nephite government system, and more. But I think Doug did okay even with that. And in the end, I tied in Moroni 10, 4-5, and challenged him to pray before he reads every day. So we'll see what happens. And then we drove to Spearfish for the night. Smiley face. Wow. I'm writing in so many smiley faces where I'm like, just grin and bear it. Okay, so just small little note. Family Service Day, I don't think that's a normal thing. Typically, it was maybe something the church was trying out, but I don't think it's still like a regular yearly thing. I don't know. Could be. But for some reason, we were getting all of the ward members to go help at some random fish hatchery with landscaping, which feels like a very strange, like, if it's some like private or government business, like, why don't they just pay people to come landscape? Like, surely there's a better way for a church congregation to volunteer, but whatever. Also, funny that we were late and we left early, but whatever. The biggest thing to me about this day was how I was so frustrated, and I was so frustrated about meeting with Doug and going with the Meagers to have a lesson with him. And first of all, talking about exchanges, it's interesting because when I was reading through the new White Handbook, which is like the missionary preparation manual or whatever, I was like reading through it a couple weeks ago, I think. Maybe it was last week. Anyway, I was reading through that, and they explained that missionaries should not go on splits with members anymore. So this, like, us splitting up and, like, one or two companions going with some members, and then I went with the meagers. Anyway, missionaries aren't supposed to do that anymore, which is, probably for the best, right? I don't know. Interesting that that's changed. But there's this trope that I'm sure survives to this day, that missionaries get upset with members when they want to tell too much quote unquote deep doctrine to their people that they're just barely teaching. And I remember being like talking about this, being trained about this, being frustrated about it, and really liking working with members who knew to sort of not tell every weird thing to the people we were teaching and just stick to the very basics. And it's just funny because now I have the reverse idea. I'm like, oh, it was good that this guy who's meeting with missionaries to learn about the church, it's awesome that the meagers were like telling him all of the weird stuff that he would need to know about. Like, once he's committed to this church, once he makes the commitment, once he makes the covenant, then it's like he's in it. So he has much better informed consent about the level of belief that he's committing to if he already knows about tithing and fasting and how much time you have to give to the church and how there's not paid clergy at the local level, what excommunication means, weird esoteric Book of Mormon Nephite government systems that they've been piecing together, right? And more than that. So now I'm glad that they were actually kind of giving him that info dump because it gave him a better idea of what he was getting into, right? Anyway, let's keep going. Sunday. Oh. Okay, real quick. Before I get into this day, this involves, there's a kind of a big story about, that involves a local LDS family, and they are Native American, American Indian, Indigenous, whichever word you prefer. And I wrote down all of the details, but I don't think I feel comfortable reading them all, just because of not only this family's personal privacy, but also just the amount of exploitation that the church has done of these people over the years, right? And I really want to have an episode coming up soon where I talk more about the history of how the church has related with Native Americans, and what the church, even to some people to this day, would call quote-unquote Lamanites. It's, I think for a lot of people considered an offensive thing, but that's don't say that. Don't call Native Americans Lamanites, but that's kind of the terminology of church stuff that is historically done, and kind of I grew up hearing a lot. So yeah, I'm gonna be, that happens this day, and I guess content warning, I'm not gonna read this, I'm gonna kind of just summarize what happened when I get to it, but just know that that's coming. Yeah, okay. Sunday, April 26, 2015, Mission Day 198. Well, today just ended super crazily, but overall, it was awesome. We had branch council before church. Then Sister Crompton spoke on the talk, The Measure of Our Hearts, for sacrament meeting. Then we sang, I Know That My Redeemer Lives. And then I taught gospel principles, during which Sister Crompton and Sister Feist stepped up to sing for gospel doctrine. Then Sister Feist and I did the opening hymn for priesthood, and then we all went to Young Women's to coax a lesson out of post-prom Sydney. We had lunch with the Warnocks, who fed us rabbit, not chicken parmesan. Then we set up the cultural hall for the New Beginnings program, the Young Woman yearly program. Then we went to Laura's for dinner. She wrote a cute card for Sister Crompton and sang I Need Thee Every Hour, and Sister Crompton cried some. Then we went to New Beginnings. Wow, very busy. Okay, we also had dinner with our neighbor Andrea, all while Sister Feist was taking care of Michelle and Sydney. So here's where I'll kind of summarize. Yes, so Michelle was high school, young woman. She had an incident with attempted suicide, and Sister Feist was kind of there being with her, and so yeah, we ended up going over to see them and see her mom and listen to her mom kind of sharing the hardships that they've had due to really the, just the generations of abuse and injustice that their family has gone through. One element that was particularly frustrating was that their living situation was causing, there was like a mold issue and they couldn't get it taken care of, and like landlord issues, and it was causing big health problems. So then it's sort of to not like say everything, her daughter Michelle ended up having to be, well, not having to be, but she ended up being really like sad and upset and being picked up by a police officer to like intervene. And now just like looking back on that, I don't know who called the police. I don't think we did, but I can just see how she's totally was like, this just none of this went the way that it should have for her getting the care she needed. For missionaries, like, we're kind of inserting as acting like we're social workers, and we weren't, and I assume that's a big part of the reason of why the kind of upset and dysregulation kept escalating, was because, it's just hard to be a young woman, it's hard to be a teenager, it's hard to be dealing with depression or whatever, whatever she was dealing with. But then adding on to that, being a woman of color, being indigenous, in a Mormon context is really emotionally, I have to guess. I have to guess at the pain, but I could see in this family how it was, they were really good people, and they were in a situation and a system that was causing problems, and they were not being given like the grace and support that they would have been given if they were like, white members. And I just was super, reading this, I was so surprised to see that like she wasn't even doing anything, and I was like, why did the police come to get her? Like, that was not helpful, and maybe it's just part of the overall issue in the US right now, is that the law enforcement officers are called when really like people need social workers to come and help, right? And like that causes lots of problems. That's a really big problem. That's, I know, bigger than the LDS church, but you know, I can say that at that point in time, my belief was that the church had the answer to everything, and the church was like the perfect organization. And now this just feels like really maybe hypocritical, or this, I don't know, it feels like a good example of how actually the church wasn't fixing the systems that were harming this family and this young woman. In fact, it was just making it worse, right? So I guess I'll end with that. Yeah, that's I'll end there. I don't want to try to say anything else, because that's really all I can say. Yeah. And that's my 30th week as a Mormon sister missionary. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast if you want to continue following my story. Ratings and reviews are very helpful and appreciated, and please also share this with anyone you think would be interested. I hope you have a great week, and if you want my advice, just remember that you can love others best when you love yourself first. Bye!